The Mystic Wood, a game from 1980, the sequel of The Sorcerer's Cave. The two games are designed by the same designer, Terrence Donnelly, and they're both based on fantasy role-playing games. The idea of like controlling, becoming a hero in a fantasy world and controlling their hero, going around, completing missions, having adventures, gaining treasure, and fighting monsters. They're both inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, even though that is not acknowledged in the games. There's only an article that the designer wrote later that was published in the Games and Puzzles magazine. The article is available online now, in which the designer admitted, I wanted a way of playing D&D without having to worry about finding a dungeon master and without having to, as a dungeon master, to build a dungeon in advance. I wanted a dungeon D&D experience you could take out of the box and play immediately. The Sorcerer's Cave is a typical dungeon crawler. The Mystic Wood is a different story because it's set outdoors. It's set in the Mystic Wood of the title, but actually also has a couple of interesting twists that make this game feel a little more modern than its predecessor, The Sorcerer's Cave. The inspirations, well, at the higher level is still D&D, obviously, but actually there are other inspirations that are acknowledged in the designer's notes that do not feel just like window dressing. They do not feel like, well, I had to write this to deny that D&D was there. There's still a denial there, but the other inspirations also seem sincere in the fact that they seem to have affected the design to an extent. And these two other inspirations are literary. They come from Renaissance literature, from two poems from the Renaissance. One, an English poem, The Fairy Queen by Spenser, and the other one, an Italian epic poem by Ludovico Ariosto. The epic poem is called in Italian L'Orlando Furioso, in English translated sometimes as Mad Roland, more often as The Frenzy of Orlando. Complex tapestries of adventures of knights going around and attempting all sorts of things. So, to start with, this is captured by the fact that there are unique victory conditions depending on the character that you're playing to capture the fact that those stories to start with were in fact stories about a lot of different plots of different characters trying to achieve different things. Let me show you how the Mystic Wood works. The game requires a pretty big area to play, as you can see here, and this is because before the game starts you need to set up 45 cards in the play area, and those 45 cards are fairly large cards. They are kind of the size of large flash cards. You set up most of them face down, with the exception of the three that you see here, which are always set up face up and always in the position where you see them. The first one is the Earthly Gate, which is where the quest for the characters starts. Then we have the Tower, where the characters go and get imprisoned when they lose a fight. And up there we have the Enchanted Gate. That is a point of reference to several game effects. Also, you may have noticed that the background on the Enchanted Gate is kind of like pinkish, purplish, whereas this one is more on the yellow, light orange side. And you see here the tower is half pinkish and half orangish. In fact, the cards that you see here on the board are half with that same background color and half with that background color. So you shuffle the two types of cards separately and you place them in the two separate areas. So you do have variety and randomization within each half of the board, but still there's a little bit of structure and a little bit of difference in the way the two areas work. Each player in the game controls one of 4 characters. You choose the knights that you control at the beginning of the game. And what is really neat is that these characters have unique victory conditions. So each player is trying to achieve something different depending on the card that is being played. Also, each knight has 2 values, numerical values. One is prowess, a mix of courage, moral fortitude, and things like that. And the other one simply is the combat strength. If you play Roland, your quest, your objective is to leave the wood with the princess. So you need to move around and look for the card that represents the princess, and then you take her out of the wood. Guyon needs to spend 3 full turns in the cave, meditating and praying, so he needs to find the location on the board that corresponds to the cave, spend 3 turns there. His stats are pretty low, but he has 1 when he's rolling against a denizen. That would be one of the creatures that are encountered in the woods. George must slay the dragon. Well, of course, he's George. And Brittle Mart, she is the female version of Roland, in the sense that she's also motivated by romantic reasons, so she needs to find the prince and leave the wood with him. So suppose that we are playing as Brittle Mart, so we select our character, we select one of these beautiful, highly thematic pawns to represent the position of the character on the board, and then we can start playing. And yes, you can play the game solitaire to see how long it takes you to complete the quest, or you can play it against the people to see who is the first player to complete the quest. During your turn, you can move to an adjacent location following one of the available paths, in which case you simply turn the corresponding card up. Each card has an arrow there. You need to keep them all pointing in the same direction to keep things consistent. You move into that location and you draw a card from the stack. These are event cards. You resolve the event. Your turn is over. And then next turn, you may go somewhere else and continue like this. Reveal cards, resolve events, and so on and so forth. Some locations may be special locations with special instructions. For example, if you are in the chapel, then you add 2 to your prowess when it is tested there. There are a couple of interesting things like that. Here we have the fountain, for example. The fountain, when you're there, you do not draw, but you may drink, roll a die, and you are teleported to one of the locations on the board. So, but how about the encounters? Here we go. So, encounters come from this deck. A typical encounter would be an enemy that you need to fight. Now, some enemies will only have combat strength, some other ones will only have prowess, some will have both. You basically use the same values as the opponent. If the opponent has both, the opponent uses both, and so do you. If the opponent has only strength, use only strength. The opponent has only prowess, you only use that. You roll a die for yourself, a die for the opponent, add the value or values that apply, add possible modifiers from bonuses that you have acquired, and if you have the highest total, you win the fight, and then you take the card, you turn it by 180 degrees, and that becomes an upgrade that you place under your card, so that only the top of the card that you conquered, that you acquired, is visible. In this case, being the Saracen Vanquisher has given me an extra prowess, so now I have a total of 4. That's a really neat way of keeping track of things without having to do pen and paper bookkeeping. Suppose that I slay the giants, then I turn them into this advantage here. There can be other types of advantages that other characters may give you when you interact with them. There are also specific encounters with specific effects, but actually I realize now I forgot to tell you what happens if you do not win the fight. It may be that it's a tie, in which case you simply remain in the space with the enemy that you're fighting, and next turn you have to fight again. If you lose the fight, then you are transported, well, the enemy stays in the area, and you're transported to the tower where you're imprisoned. This is very thematic because in most epic poems of the Renaissance, the knights tended to be imprisoned for long periods of time rather than to be slain, but alas, that means that you're stuck there for an unspecified number of turns, because to escape you need to roll a 5 or a 6, which can be really tedious and really irritating. You're sitting there, the people are having fun, and you keep rolling and nothing happens. So, just to show you some other possible encounters, the Enchantress, super annoying, because if she captures you, then you escape only on throw of 6. If that happens to me, I know I'm already gonna be her prisoner for the rest of the game, because that's just how bad things are for me when I am in this kind of situation. Roll a specific number to free yourself, and I never roll that number. The bishop is interesting because you may choose to play with him for 3 full turns and then you receive a ring, which becomes an upgrade, magic ring, I assume, because this ring gives you extra strength. You may become the new king and occupy the castle to win if you defeat the king. Other characters, when you encounter them, they morally bind you to accompany them to specific locations. Other characters may cause other types of effects. The rogue, you roll a die, may betray you and send this to the tower, or give you a key, which releases you from the tower the next time that you find yourself there. So it's not just to fight or not fight, but different things may happen. You may acquire a shield, the magician may do different things. The queen doesn't do anything per se, but there may be other cards that tell you bring this card, accompany this card to the queen. Then you need to find the queen before that can happen. The Holy Grail, no less. So this is really how it works. Things are pretty intuitive because modifications to the state of the game are caused by game effects that are self-explanatory and described in the cards, and or by upgrades that are added to your character. And so, again, they look pretty intuitive. At a glance, you will know all of the upgrades that you have. So things are pretty intuitive. Move around, resolve events created by the cards, fight the fights that you need to fight, and try to accomplish your mission before other people do. Now, if you watched my previous review for the Sorcerer's Cave, you know some of the complaints that I had about this game. One being that you cannot get attached to your character because characters die very easily. The game is super brutal, and once a character dies, it can be replaced by another one. But if you change character many times, then you don't get the sense of immersion that you have if you control a single character and you see that character grow up slowly, acquiring new upgrades, learning the trait of being a hero, and so on and so forth. And this was done in the Sorcerer's Cave by the desire of the designer to keep things simple and not to have bookkeeping. So you don't have to write down stats, etc., etc. In fact, pretty much the status, the state of the characters in the game could only be in the game or out of the game. That could be friendly or unfriendly, but that was it. You couldn't improve it anyway. The Mystic Wood solves that problem of not having bookkeeping, which is not a problem, but solves the problem of not being able to create nuances around the character. So in this game, you do not have bookkeeping, but you simply have cards that turn into player aids attached to the character, and you see the character acquire new stuff. So that is nice. Also, characters don't die. The heroes that you control may lose the stuff that they have. Or they may be prisoners. Now, in that, there is the one complaint that I have about this game, which really shows the age. This is something that was common back in the day, which is to punish players by making them skip turns. This is something, to me, unforgivable. There's never, not ever, a reason to do that. Why? Because I understand the idea in game mechanics that a penalty should reduce your chances of winning the game, should put you behind the other players by some degree. That makes perfect sense. You need that element to make things interesting. There's never a reason to make that coincide with reducing the play time for a player, reducing the enjoyment for the player, taking the player out. There's never a reason to punish the character to alter the state of the game to the disadvantage of the penalized player. You should have a player rolling thumbs there for 1 or 2 or multiple turns. That is, to me, never acceptable. There are always ways of doing that, of solving that, but back in the day, that was very common. This is done here. If you're unlucky, you get in the tower, you're unlucky with your rolls, you may spend most of the game in the tower, and that doesn't sit well with me. So what I do, a simple alteration that you can do, which is what I did, if you lose a fight and you should go to the tower and you have upgrades, you lose an upgrade, and you're forced to move out of the area where you are. If you do not have upgrades, then an opponent chooses where of the 3 initial cards, one of the 2 gates or the tower, you teleport to. And if you go to the tower, it's just a matter of being there, but you do not have to be imprisoned. Why so? Because the opponent will see what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to do. So the penalty now is to be transported to another area to be further from your objective, but you never skip a turn. There are always ways of tweaking a design so that the old idea, I punish you by skipping a turn, turns into I punish in some other ways, but we keep playing because that's why we took the game out of the box to start with, to play, not to sit around it. That's my only complaint. But as you can see, it's pretty heartfelt. That's an important thing for me. The game could also be played cooperatively, for example, with multiple players controlling the same knight, or everybody controlling a knight, but we just trying to make the band triumph. You can also play solitaire with a single player controlling a single knight, in which case the change that you want to make is simply to introduce hit points, health points, call them stamina, call them whatever you want. You assign a certain number of those points, keep track of those with tokens, to your Carter 5, let's say, to experiment with, and then when the Carter goes down to 0, the Carter is dead. Maybe there are also blank cards here, and you can create some effects that will allow your Carter to regain strength, to regain stamina, health points, etc. So there are a couple of small adjustments that you can make, but actually that can make the game feel more modern and more playable. But as is, if nothing else, is still, it feels pretty fresh. There are a couple of those dated things, such as skip a turn here and there, that you can spot, but it's not nearly as dire a situation. It doesn't feel as dated as the Sorcerer's Cave. It feels fresher, it feels more playable. It has more elements that we appreciate in gaming nowadays, such as the connection with a single Carter that you control throughout the game, the sense of seeing the Carter grow over time and gain new skills, the unique objectives that each Carter is trying to achieve, which also give a little more of story, a little more personality to the Carter. You have the variety of encounters, which you also have in the previous game here, but here the encounters are more interesting because there's more variety, there are more different things that may happen. On the minus side, this game already did not have much tactical combat, not many tactical decisions. You have even fewer here because you do not even have the option of working together in a team of a mix of melee people and range people that you organize differently as you have in the Sorcerer's Cave. But again, the advantage is here that you have a connection with a single Carter. It would have been great if some of the upgrades that you get could have been companions that you could use to put in the second line, and then you could choose to attack there, maybe to have them support you with range, or to choose them to put in the front line. So there's no tactical option pretty much when it comes to resolve combat. And again, another thing is that the game is still very, very, very luck-based. Like the Sorcerer's Cave, it feels like a progenitor to games such as Wrath of the Shardalon and Legend of Drizzt and Bolom Elemental Evil. The idea pretty much is the same. It is implemented much better in later games, but it is interesting to me for circular reasons to see how the earlier implementations did. And actually, come to think of it, these two games, I believe, they may be some of the earliest, especially this one, if not the earliest game, to use a modular map in a dungeon delve type of situation, in an exploration type of things. Even fantasy games that started being inspired by D&D tended to have word game type of maps with access at the time. These are interesting early examples of a changing scenario, of a changing landscape that consequently also gives you more replay value. The Mystic Wood, not a bad game by contemporary standards, especially if you're willing to think a little bit with the design. in any case, an interesting moment in the history of board gaming, in particular in the history of narrative board games. So board games that attempt to tell you a story. It's not by chance here that the designer's notes identify the sources of the game in literary masterpieces rather than in games of the past. Hope you enjoyed this departure from my usual type of video. I hope you enjoyed this look into the past and at the specific elements of the history of board gaming. In the future, most likely there will be more of these reviews as I keep studying, exploring some of these older games, more of these reviews about the games from back in the day, in particular with a look at the narrative storytelling element of these games. The Mystic Wood, the game I talked about today, not a bad game, not a great one, but in any case, an interesting one.